Yeah, yeah.
So today we're talking about, and this is a commentary on episode 110 of your podcast, which is titled Pure Happiness, Why You Need to Train Your Mind. I really love the title, first of all, so why don't we just start by talking about how you came up with that?
Well, what's interesting is I didn't call it pure happiness at first. I don't know what I called it. Usually I get an idea of what I want to talk about, and then I write and I just start writing, and then I go back and I change. And I did pure happiness just because I kind of wanted to make that contrast of soundbite, do this and you'll be happy. You know how people advertise? I mean, the advertisement industry is brilliant, but they capture your senses and they just say, just do this and you'll be happy. So when I said pure happiness, I was thinking more in with the idea of really from the inside out, not some outside sensory gadget that's going to make you feel happy. And that's the whole purpose. So that's where the word pure came up. I wish I could remember what the older title was. Do you remember? I don't know. I probably texted you beginning of the week and I said I could probably look up that text. I already shut everything out. But anyway, it was something different, something happiness. But I said, no, that's where pure. And really working with or why we need to train our mind because everyone's still, I don't want to say everyone, but the people that have come and called and all the questions that come in, our community is really giving me food for this thought, food to get this going. And it really comes down to understanding the mind field. And, people talk about mind, but the workings of the mind is really essential having that understanding. There's this big meditation movement now. And do people know why they want to meditate? Do they really know what the purpose is of training the mind? And are they even looking at it as a training for the mind? I don't know that. I can guess, but I don't know. So that's what gave me an idea. I was away for a while in my own trainings and retreats, and people are there, but really, why are we there? What's our real intention of why we're doing what we're doing? And we do need to train our mind. Otherwise, we're all over the place searching outside for happiness when it's really on the inside. Nothing will ever make you happy on the
Gotcha.
outside. Nothing. Even if you get the best new, whatever you want, ultimately that will cause you misery because it'll either break down or if it's a person leaves their body or leaves you or whatever. Nothing on the outside will ever bring happiness. So I wanted to get into the functionality of the mind.
Right, and one of the first things you get into in the introduction is describing the science that teaches you how to be. So the science of being, I think we have talked in the past about the art and science of being or the practice that goes along with that. So maybe you could talk about that.
No one can ever tell you who you are. I mean, my whole life, the teachers have always said, major sages know who you are. Well, who am I? If we go to that. And so when we put on all these masks, these veils as we go along. And we're programmed early in life, if not from previous lifetimes, where we have these impressions. So we come into a family. You'll have 4 children, 5 children, but they'll all have different personalities because based on what we've stored in our own memory, what happens is we start shaping our behavior according to how we fit in, what's going to make it maybe less fearful, less aggressive, less negative. We always go for the pleasure. I mean, as animals, we always go for really what is going to bring us peace and happiness. Everyone searches for happiness and no one wants really conflict. So what happens is when we understand our being, we're pure. It's all those layers of persona that we mask our own light with. I'm in the middle, as you know, of writing a book. And what I'm talking about is how do we really understand and know our own being, who we are, so that we can go out and shine. That's why I always use the word radiance. Radiance is that, this luminous energy within ourselves. And we could only do that when we understand our own our own being, who we are, the layers of our being. We're not the body and we're not the mind. We're users of the body and mind. And it's quite a principle. I can say this, and I work with a lot of students, clients, and people, and even myself, when I was told that early on 40 years ago. I knew that in an intellectual manner, but when you finally feel and see and recognize that feeling that really dwells, that persona that's within our own self of who we really are, that's when everything starts to take on a different role in our life. We don't let the outside world disturb us as much. You see,
Right.
that's the key. I'm doing this here in a practical sense because there's so much conflict going on the outside now. There's a lot of things happening, and many of us feel that. We all do, we're human beings, but not to let it really affect us on a very deep level and cause despondency, anxiety, depression is to really know yourself. It's still there. We still want to have the compassion and we feel it, but not to the level where it devastates us. We have to be able to put it into perspective. That's what it's really all about. Long answer for a short question.
Well, yeah, aren't they all? So the next thing, as you already mentioned, the mind chatter and rumination of thoughts and feelings that basically lead us to that state of despondency that you mentioned. So, which of course leads to anxiety. And what we talked about last week was the programming, the viruses of the mind. What do you do about the mind
Okay.
chatter?
Okay, so that's where we become the witness. So if you understand, or if we step in, let's say step into our being, then we're operating 90% here in our being and 10% out there, for example. So we're able to watch the workings of the mind. As I mentioned in this, what I did in this podcast, and it's based on a yoga science principle, of course. I didn't make this up. Uh, the great sages have really given this and digested it for us. And where we have those four functions of mind operating, and one of them is the manas, or the mind, the thinking mind. And that thinking mind is where we're all operating most of the time, including myself. I have to pull myself back and stop. People say stop thinking so much or get out of your head. You've heard that, right?
Of course, yeah.
Especially, we've all heard that. Well, that's fine to say, but really, what does that mean? And that's the key here. I'd like to, in the work that I do, let's just uh, do our experiment, right? Our self experiment. What is the end? But you have to have that knowledge, right? Remember, knowledge and practice. Knowledge digested, we digest it through our practice, and only then do we come to understand our own being. So the purpose of the work that I'm doing, or even in this podcast, is let's see what the sages had to offer in yoga science. Let's just see what they've had to offer us by way of knowledge that and practices that we could start unfolding who we are. And once we unfold and recognize who we are, we can watch the mind chatter. The mind chatter is just a habit of the mind. And, when we're doing meditation, I sometimes say to people, relax the root of your tongue. Because the tongue is an organ, right? Two sensory inputs. One is for taste, one is for speaking. So if we relax, right, relaxation is the door to meditation. If we relax the root of our tongue, you'll actually see the mind chatter goes away. So the key of all of this, I didn't put it in this podcast because I have other podcasts on episodes on this with relaxation as the door to meditation. Once we relax, meditation comes spontaneously. That's why I say to people, oh, can you teach me meditation? They'll ask. I say, no, I don't teach meditation. I just give you the tools and skills to chart the inner dimension of your own life so that you could spontaneously meditate. Because most people say, I just can't meditate. My mind just starts running around because no one has really laid out the tools that's given you the skills to unlock your own mystery. The mystery is within yourself, and no one can give that to you. Only the real teachers will actually give you the tools so that you could go out and empower your own being. Because you and I are the same, and we've always said that. The only difference is our habits. It's just habits, and it's habits of the mind. And those habits of the mind filter into habits of the body.
Makes sense. So, in the podcast, you also discussed practicing trying to still your mind and how, well, as we all know, it's not always easy to still the mind. And then you talk about understanding the workings of mind. So, maybe you could talk about if you don't understand the workings of the mind and you're trying to practice stillness, how does that work? And why is stillness so hard?
Stillness is hard because the nature of the mind is to be, we've heard the monkey mind, and the old story is how can you keep you pretend there's a monkey, right? The monkey is the mind itself. Put it on a pole and let it go up and down, up and down. Otherwise, it could become very destructive, right? Your mind can be your greatest ally or, and we all know this, the greatest enemy. So by working with that, and what's the easiest way for those that are just tuning in even now and haven't done any of the trainings that I provide, it's the breath, because the breath links the body and the mind. Wherever the breath goes or wherever the mind goes, they go together. And so just by learning how to breathe using our diaphragm muscle, I don't want to get too scientific here, but just learning to breathe as a baby would breathe before the age of 5. It's natural. It's nothing that's superimposed and something artificial. Will actually start regulating the mind, the chatter, and bring you into the present. Because in the present, there's no mind chatter. It just is. You're in the breath. And so that mind chatter is really what creates our problems. So some of the practices that I've done over the years, when I recognize, you have to first recognize, right? Be aware. And that's where I've always said to people who have come to me through the mindfulness trainings, you need a little bit more than just mindfulness the way it's taught. You need to be able to do something with that mindfulness. So we're mindful of our thoughts. That's perfect. That's an awareness of our thoughts. But what are we going to do with that? Because otherwise they'll just go on, they cease to end. They'll just go on and on and on. When you see the thought, you recognize it, and you recognize that is not me. Remember, we just started. When we're established in our being, remember in the resilience training, I talked about there's 2 things in life: become established in being, and that's what we're talking about here, once you know yourself, and then take action in the world. Many right now are taking action in the world without understanding who they even are. And that's where aggression comes in, fighting, hate ideas, irritation, frustration. Once we understand ourselves, the more you understand yourself and are established in your own being, the more you understand others. And you can even actually assist. That's where we come into service, where we could show others, become established in being. So the easiest way to do that, I'm more chatter today than I usually am, but we're talking about mind chatter, but I get excited when we talk about these topics. But the more established that we become in our own being, and we can do that with our breath. Our breath acts as the anchor. The breath also leads us into relaxation. Without breath, I know when I first started teaching meditation over 15 years ago, there were many programs out there and people would come and take this program. And I was always so surprised when they would say, wow, Susan, I never learned breathing. Well, how could you be doing how could you be doing any kind of training in meditation, mindfulness, or anything, yoga even, and you haven't really learned the science and art of breath? That's at the root of everything. There's nothing fancy here, and I don't create anything fancy to sell a course, sell a product. I'm just not going to feed that to people because it's really as simple as breath. We don't need new practices. We just need to learn how to breathe. Even steady flow, inhale, exhale, with little to no pause between the breath. And if you could master that, you've mastered everything in life, because that's the way you enter the body on birth, and that's the way you leave the body on expiration or death.
Right.
And I'm not making this up. I'm not a genius to make all of this up. I've trained with yoga masters, and I continually to do that. I'm in a great tradition that actually doesn't really take the sound bites, like I say, the sound bites technology. Oh, this is good. This must be the reason why I should meditate. No, it has to be a complete living traditional practice. And that's the key. And that's the only thing that I understand on how to bring out to the world. That's the only thing that I can do, because that's with integrity and with honoring everyone's intelligence and saying, look, everyone, you have the intelligence. Just train the energy of your mind, because that energy of your mind is the essence of your life.
Right, and understanding the monkey mind, which is the workings of our mind, and taming it,
Yeah.
if you will, makes
If you
sense.
Well, if you were to have a puppy, I've trained dogs before. People liken it to even the horse and the reins and on the chariot. But if we were to even take a puppy, when you take a dog and bring them home, and some people have dogs that aren't puppies, and the dog is jumping, barking, running around, that dog wants to be, I mean, Cesar Millan made a whole business of it, a whole industry, and really helping people with working with their pets. And he always said, he works with the owners. It's really the people, because the dog will really reflect the state of mind of the owner in many, many cases. And if we train that animal, that fur child, sometimes we say our furry child, are part of our family, but when we train it to be to be calm and stable, and we take charge, and we allow that to have a comfortable zone, and where we befriend it rather than attack it. The same principles apply to the mind. We must befriend the mind, be kind to it. But you could only do that if you understand your being, back to what we just spoke about. When you're established in your being and you can see yourself as that light being inhabiting a body, you can look at and utilizing the mind as an instrument. You see, we use the mind as an instrument, but in many cases, the mind decides for us. Remember, I spoke in the podcast, I spoke about the ego. That's the I, me, mine, mine. This is mine. I like this. I want this. This is my house. This is my mind. This is how I am. All of that identification, actually, it has a purpose, but it also can separate us from who we actually are, because we really think we're better than someone else, or we think we are smarter than someone else. That's where that separation comes, and that's the ego, the ahamkara part of the mind. And what feeds that is the other aspects of mind. We have chitta, which is our memories that bubble up. We don't even know that they're memories, but they're based on pleasant experiences, perhaps, that we had in childhood. And so we like those things. And they come up and they say, well, maybe I should do this, maybe I don't. So you have these two working together. And what happens is they're wonderful to really acknowledge and know, but they're not, I wouldn't say that they're the real answer of what we want to relay or rely on, like the thinking mind. The thoughts come in, so all of this together is perfect. Remember, I had said something. If we think of a wheel, let's think of a wheel with four spokes. The wheel is the body, but it's the mind that has to take action before the body moves. That mind are the four spokes. So we get the sensory input, we get our thinking mind. So if I say to you, hey, George, take a seat and close your eyes. Before you even do that, you have to have that thought. That thought comes in the thinking mind, and the mind then tells the body, right, to close the eyes and sit down. It doesn't go the other way around.
Yeah, as soon as you said that, I started to think, oh, should I do what she's saying or just follow along? So
Oh,
yeah,
see,
I'm
see,
like,
there you go. Should I or
exactly.
shouldn't I?
Yeah,
But that's the ego, right? So that's the ego part of our mind that says, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I, should. And we get so frustrated, and that's why we can't make decisions, and that's in the extreme sense. But then we have that buddhi, which is from the Buddha is the enlightened one. It's the light. That's the being. That's the even more subtle aspect of the mind that when we're established in our being, we have access to that. That's our intuitive mind. And then I quickly saw your response, and it said, well, wait a minute, we're just doing this as an episode. Do I do it? And all of a sudden you hooked into your intuitive and say, no, I'm here. If I start going off she starts bringing me into a practice, we're not going to get into we won't
right.
be able to have the technology done for today. So that's really the way it works with all of with the way the mind works. It's like a wheel. And those spokes of the wheel are, when we're in control of our life and know who we are, we recognize them. And what's the best way to recognize them is to start working with breathing, meditation, and all those practices. That's when the awareness comes, because all the knowledge is already within everyone. We already have all the knowledge. And every one of us have known when we're really quiet and we give ourselves that space, that stillness, it comes forward. Even in biblical times or any religion, it's be still and know that I am God. What does that mean? The God is the center of our being, or the Holy Spirit, or whatever religion. Every religion has it. And every religion is hooked or connected to meditation to attend to. So we attend to who we are, and then we also attend to the the objects of that, of which are our body, our mind, our breath. All those are tools to attend to and go into the aspect of or the depth of who we are.
It makes sense. So, I mean, we talked about the monkey mind, mind chatter, staying focused. I think in the podcast you also mentioned, and in other podcasts, the energy of the mind being the essence of life. So, as you communicated that, and I had to decide, listen to the mind chatter. Oh, should I follow along? Because I naturally will follow along, as you know, when you're describing practices. Oh no,
Yes.
I have to focus my mind because that's not what I'm doing. So, situational awareness, and that's the yoga science, right? Understanding the workings of the mind. Ooh, let's not get distracted. Stay focused because your task is this, and so you can apply the energy of the mind to what you're doing for focus.
Right. And focus, I've had people say to me, "Oh, focus, that's not following your heart." I just had a question come in this week, and I know we're doing a commentary, but how does all of this relate to our heart? And I always said, if you don't have a focused mind, you can't have the compassion at the heart. So what people are talking about now, yes, we do need to have compassion. But how do you have compassion, sustainable compassion, not momentarily compassion? How do we really, compassion is spontaneous once you focus your mind and you're focusing your mind on who you are. You see, what I mean by focus the mind, you're collecting and containing the energy of the mind and you're concentrating it on your being. And then when you do that, compassion will flow spontaneously. But that's easier said than done. There's many people have bouts of compassion, but as soon as something doesn't go their way or they're tired or irritable, what happens? We attack, we shut down, we have anxiety, all of those
Well,
things.
you mentioned in the podcast that a single thought or feeling can
Oh,
disrupt the whole
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
We've all experienced that. When you hear, for example, if you're in peace and harmony, and then you hear what went on in Australia, for example, the first thing you think of is, and that's okay, we're human beings. We have compassion for everyone. We have that, we're heart. When we're a human being and not operating on another level, less human, we really, because we're not with our instincts, we're rising above that. We're able to feel what others really feel. And what are we going to do with that? Yeah, you get affected by that. But the more trained you are, you're able to pull back and recognize that your stillness, and if you're skillful or you've had those practices under your belt, you can actually, that's what the year-long meditation is about at the Himalayan Institute. Whereas a collective consciousness, we're all collective. See, not ego here, meaning this is mine, my practice, I'm this. Let's do it for the whole, for the community. That's why I talk about community here. Pass this along, not for popularity, but if something is sparks your interest, something that may help others or serve others. I don't even like to use the word help because that implies people don't have the skill to do it themselves, but to serve others, to really move forward and move beyond the obstacle that's created with the mind. Remember when you used to say waiting for the telephone call?
Absolutely.
Well, that's when we first met each other. How many years? 25 years ago or so, where yeah, the mind would come up and say, well, wait a minute, you really can't do this. Maybe you shouldn't. It's not perfect enough. And you used to say to me, stop waiting for the phone call, because I always wanted to, well, no, I need another few years of practice before I come out. Well, it is 25 years, 30 years later. But that's what was the mind right then, you see. So that's, I don't want to get off subject, but that's really where the mind comes in on how we work with that. And then our body moves forward accordingly. And that's our health too, George. People wonder where disease comes from. Well, you could really trace that back. It's all connected. So when we're in peace and harmony in the mind, it's very, very difficult. not in all cases, it's very difficult for disease to set in and take hold and take over. It's usually something that has been disrupted in the homeostatic part. You've heard me use those words before, in the homeostasis of the body-mind interaction. Because then, and then ego is not identifying, because ego we need, because that's the self-identification, but not, we're identifying ourselves, but not that we're so separate from others that we're better, we create disturbance.
Right, and that's where the science of being, or the yoga science, comes into play because,
Correct.
we don't have that knowledge, so we need to learn it. And in the podcast, you said something about, loving the knowledge that it's there for the taking, basically by all of us, and that, if you want to live a fulfilled life, that anyone can learn.
I also mentioned the codifier, Sage Patanjali, the codifier of ancient science of yoga, and Pandit Rajmani Tiganath, who's the spiritual director of the Himalayan Institute. He had done those commentaries. I think I sent you those, or you had gotten them with study of the Yoga Sutra and the practice of the Yoga Sutra, those two commentaries. And when you really work with that, that's a very it's been digested for our public now where we are consciously, because each time commentaries come out, it's where's the public at that time. The truth today was not the truth 2000 years ago in the respect of how it's delivered. It's still the same truth, but delivery now, things really need to be digested. They really need to be in soundbite technology, but in with truth and knowledge, not with false prophets, as I always say, PROFITS, because people's attention spans are a little bit different, if not a lot different, because they're getting tweeted, Facebook, with all those other things. I don't even know what they're called at this point, but they're getting inundated, and it's great. See, that technology is great to keep everyone connected, but at the same time, if there's more than a little bit of the 10% of your mind that's out there, you're going to become drained. You will become exhausted. I used to say 2 centuries, I'm not that old yet in this body, but 2 decades ago, I used to say, use the example when I first came out with the Vital Energy program. I used to say, if you go to a mall on a Saturday morning, you come out of there exhausted. Now I could say, just go to your computer screen, right? And log into Facebook, which is already probably automatically logged into 99% of the people. And you'll exhaust yourself in moments with all the flashes, all the news. And then we're so far out that we're not bringing in. And one of the keys I give students who train in our programs, I always tell them, set a time when you're going to turn on technology during the day and turn off. You can't be plugged in all the time because the mind won't be happy, healthy, and reward ourselves with that fullness that we're all meant to be. Remember, I had said in the podcast that Patanjali was really looking that all of yoga is really people are doing yoga, but they're more into the clothes, the water bottles, what kind of mat they have, many, many, many places, doing the exercise rather than happiness, health, and reward and fullness of life, that freedom and fulfillment we're all looking for. It feels good, but it's much deeper than just a physical movement. That physical movement has even layers to really find who you are, what you are all about. And it's wonderful, but it needs to be taught with the breath and with that inner awareness. And it's really
Yes.
all about preparing for meditation. Asana was developed, as you've heard me say over and over again. Posture is so that you can sit still in a meditative place. If you haven't learned stillness, that's the key to start. And we all have to start. We all have to learn that, especially now in our current climate of where we are in society. Stillness is the key. And that's where pure happiness comes from. When we train our mind for pure stillness. And
Right.
then we begin. Once we establish the stillness, as in the Yoga Sutras, once we establish the stillness of within, then, only then, are we beginning the path of yoga. That's how it was written ancient times ago. Meanwhile, everybody's doing yoga, but wait a minute. We have to really come established in stillness. And we do that stillness through working with the breath, working with the mind, and doing that. And so that's where it is. And what I love most, as I always say, what I love most about life right now is the veil is very thin and knowledge is there for our taking. We have the internet. We have great a great master that I'm with that is writing commentary, setting up practices for us, a living master, and just allowing us to really have a life of freedom and fulfillment. And all we have to do is have the intention. We got the knowledge, it's coming. The teachers are appearing who are able to give that knowledge. It's more evident right now, especially we just had the eclipse and the what was the other? We had the eclipse and the full moon and everything. There's a real shift happening 2020. So that knowledge is really going to be present and people are really ready for real knowledge now. We're not going to play sound bites anymore. We're not going to just think that, just because we buy this object, we're going to have instant enlightenment. It doesn't work that way. The knowledge is here now for our taking and the practices. As I always say, you have to do your practice. And I'm always here. We're here, you and I now, to serve as a base where people could come in a community and learn practices and contribute and be supported. It's very important that everyone's included, no matter where you are in life. Just have the intention and the sincerity to learn and understand and know yourself. And it's right there. It's within you. And they always say, right, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. And the teacher is within yourself. But an external teacher, external guru, whatever, is also very, very helpful. When you're ready, it just happens. And the teachers are there and they're coming out now because now it's the time for that to be present.
Wow, that's very powerful. I mean, the podcast itself was amazing and powerful, but I'm glad and grateful for the opportunity to kind of break it down and go to deeper level with some of the topics that you discussed. So if you haven't, for folks out there listening on YouTube, if you haven't listened to it, that's episode 110, which you could listen on susantaylor.org, or it's here in the YouTube channel as well, so you could click on that to listen to it. So thank you.
Thanks, George.